Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks for coming in. I really appreciate it. I'm really excited to talk to you guys today about how fear rather is a form or is courage literally in action. And how, just in my own journey, sort of the things that I have learned about myself and taking action and how fear is an ever present emotion in that context. Um, so I really appreciate you stopping in, coming by to say hi. It's really wonderful to have folks. I know you're busy. It's Friday morning where I am. I don't know where you are in the U.S. or on the planet, but I appreciate you taking time to come. I know that again, you have a lot going on in your life. So I'm just really grateful for your time and for energy. I'll just wait for folks to kind of come in. It feels like it's been such a busy week and it has also like flown by. Um, this past weekend, I submitted a documentary. It's a short film, about 15 minutes long, and it's my first one. And I can't tell you the amount of time and stress and crying that I did in order to get to this place and point of submission. It was a really intimidating process. I'm not a filmmaker. I have, have nothing to do with the entertainment industry. I think the only thing that might be remotely close is that I live in LA, but I'm definitely not in a creative industry. I just launched a podcast this past fall. I think that that's probably the closest that I can get to that industry, if you will. And the podcast is called Courage Class, and Courage Class centers on the lived experiences of the AAPI community. And I interview trailblazers from the community who are really pushing the envelope when it comes to conversations around success, wellness, health, I just create a context for or um, a space for us to have these sometimes very difficult conversations. And they're difficult because there's a certain, belief structure or value structure that in general the Asian American community has been taught. Many of us were immigrants, or our families or previous generations were immigrants to the US. And with that comes its own set of unique trauma and survival skills. And from that, really, in varying degrees, birth the sort of common values um, and experiences across our community. Now, it's really important to say that we're not a monolith. Although the word the phrase Asian American, by definition, is treating us such. But it's important that to recognize that there are very distinct cultures and beautifully distinct cultures across the community. And there are, again, very similar experiences and values that we can all draw upon. And so, this is why I decided to focus the podcast specifically on our collective experience. Now, I'm the granddaughter of immigrants. My grandparents, both sets, immigrated during a time when the Chinese Exclusion Act was still a law, and with that, they immigrated through Angel Island. Both of my grandmothers were match made with my grandfathers, and they made the journey across the ocean to come to the United States, across the Pacific Ocean to come to the United States, and both of my grandfathers actually immigrated in um, when I was when they were young. They were young, and they came over essentially without parents. They came over with family members, but I know my maternal grandfather came over around the time when he was 10. So, my eldest son's age, which I cannot even imagine. And he had to have like hernia surgery while he was being held or detained rather in Angel Island. So why am I on this topic? So I'm just sharing this because I wanted to share some context with you that um, really roots sort of the healing journey that I have been on. I have in this journey have been really tasked or felt compelled to really explore those roots and to better understand why I am the way that I am. Because it's part of my story. And I never really gave thought to that up until, literally last year when I took a sabbatical from work and I started really dialing in on a lot of therapy, a lot of self development work. Much of that self development work lived inside of different podcasts. So a student literally of like Mel Robbins and Jay Shetty, Emma Grede. These are all people who are sort of unknowingly in my podcast cabinet, if you will. And that really took me down a journey of understanding my cultural roots. And that was much of what I ended up talking about in therapy. I ended up talking about, there's a history, a cultural and a historical context of being a caregiver and very specific gendered roles, stereotype gendered roles, very similar to what we have in a Western context, but particularly so in an Asian context, where a lot of the work that women do at home is not seen, is not recognized as work. And I was seeing those patterns sort of play out in my relationships, in work, even the way I would sort of just take on stuff and then I'd complain about it later because I didn't understand how to draw boundaries. So there was just a whole host of issues, if you will, that I had to really work through. Now, I feel like I'm still working through, it's never a destination I feel like you arrive at, but I share all of this because, this is what really led to the launch of the podcast Courage Class, recognizing that there was really a white space in the podcast context for talking specifically about our AAPI unique experiences as Asians, and really wanting to fill that gap. Um, Recently, and I'll go ahead. I'll still wait for folks to sort of trickle in, but I recently have been spending a lot of time on understanding fear as a concept, fear in terms of how it shows up in my own life, and how it has historically kept me small because I've refused to sort of acknowledge that fear was even part of my journey. I was really adamant about, like stuffing that down. And, in my family, you don't acknowledge emotions like ever, never learned that. And so and I've also learned that fear is synonymous with weakness. So the notion of actually saying that out loud, was very shameful. And so I've been spending the last couple of weeks really trying to understand that as a concept. And recently reread this wonderful text by Pema Chodron. And I apologize if I did not say that correctly, but her work, When Things Fall Apart, it almost makes me cry because it helped me to better understand that one, fear is a common human part of a common human part, excuse me, a common part of the human experience, that there is no person or thing on the planet that doesn't experience a level of fear, especially when you start to think outside of the narratives that have just been shoved down your throat. And in an Asian context, we have named some of those narratives: model minority, um, the overburdened caretaker. And while like an overburdened caretaker isn't necessarily unique to the Asian experience, it comes with it historical and cultural context, very similar to what I just shared with you. Women are just expected to to do work, and it's not recognized. And they manage things at home, and when especially when my grandmothers immigrated, they not only managed things at home, but they had a job, because they had to survive and there was no other choice. And so a lot of the work fell on, of course, both of my grandparents, but my grandmothers carried double loads. Um, and so really reacquainting myself, going back to fear, reacquainting myself and really understanding how that concept showed up in my life, um, has been at the risk relearning fear and and sort of adding to my understanding of fear that one, it's a common human experience, and it's something that no person or thing on the planet doesn't, but that when I acknowledge that fear is part of the process, that it's okay to be scared to do something new, to step outside of the narratives that have been handed to you. If you can acknowledge that and you can allow it to sit alongside of you, you can say, okay, you're here to stay. I'm going to let you stay reluctantly. And I'm still going to act. Like that is something that I have spent a lot of time better acquainting or learning new, not better acquainting, just learning something new, that it's okay. It's going to be there. No matter what you decide, what steps you take, even if you're not stepping outside of the narrative, right? Like, let's just say you're continuing down your pathway, because you want to, because that's the chosen pathway for you. You're still going to encounter things that are going to make you nervous, right? And this idea that, okay, fear is still going to be there and I'm still going to act, totally new concept to me. And that's honestly what got me through to building, creating this documentary, this very personal documentary about myself. Now, if you knew me before Courage Class, you would know that making a documentary about myself, or even having a podcast that focuses on some of the issues that we talk about, is not in my risk profile, like, at all. In fact, if anything, I play very safe. I play very small historically. Again, because I was, didn't want, I was so fearful of, in an unhealthy way, so fearful of like messing up, not doing it right. I would totally keep myself small. So the idea, or the action that I took, I should say, this past fall, again, is not something that I would ever do in my previous life. If I had not done a lot of work on myself, if I had not, frankly, restudied fear and the true definition of fear, if I hadn't dug into some of the research even on fear and taking action, there is no way in hell I would have ever done what I have done in this past fall. So I'm going to take a pause there. I just want to thank folks for joining. I really appreciate you taking time. Um, you have a busy morning or afternoon or wherever you might be in the world. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to come into the room and right now the topic of today is to talk about fear and how fear is actually a form of courage. At least this is what I've learned in my studies of it this past fall. And I really think that it's that idea that fear is one, a common human experience, and two, as so long as you acknowledge fear is going to be there no matter what you do. And allowing yourself to still making the choice to still take action is super important, um, especially if you are doing the brave work of rejecting the narratives maybe that have been forced upon you, and you're recognizing that you just want something different for your life. I think that that is just part of the process. It's par for the course, and it's not something that you're going to be able to escape or stuff down or gaslight out of yourself. It's better to just acknowledge that that's going to be part of the experience, because per research, it is. It is part of the experience. Again, there's not a person on the planet that doesn't experience some level of fear. especially when they begin to pivot and do something different. And as long as you can accept that is part of the process, then I really believe you will be able to do big things. So I'm going to pause there. Thanks so much for just, joining, for taking a minute out of your busy day. Um, and if you have any questions, feel free to just drop it in the chat. I'm so happy to share that, or to answer any questions that you might have. Um, just a little bit about myself. So my name is Lindsay, because you clicked on the on the live link. But I'm the creator and host of a podcast called Courage Class. And Courage Class um, is a podcast rather that centers on the lived experiences of the AAPI community. And I interview trailblazers from the community around conversations with respect to health and wellness, reclaiming narratives around success, and the reason why I felt compelled to specifically launch this for the API community is because I have been a student of so many podcasts in the last couple of years, particularly last year. And, I love Mel Robbins and Jay Shetty. I was just listening to a Jamie Kern Lima podcast. I love, of course, Oprah. How can I leave her out? Michelle Obama. Emma Grede, all of these people who are unknowingly part of my podcast cabinet, if you will. And I really drank their Kool-Aid around, you know, I know that they, in varying degrees, subscribe to this sort of notion of being the best version of who you are. Maybe they don't phrase it specifically like that, but I really believe that that's what they're trying to encourage through their platforms. But also, in listening to them, I really felt as though a lot of the experiences that I was talking about in therapy, I was talking a lot about, growing up and culturally and historically, sort of what I've experienced, some of the narratives even that I was trying to actively undo in therapy and in my own work. And I realized that many of these people, not all, they weren't talking about specifically the Asian American experience. And why would they? They're not Asian American. And so I saw a white space in the podcast self development space. I really felt like there was a space for our conversations. And gosh, I wish I would have, had someone to really learn this from. I almost wonder, I'm curious whether or not it would have expedited some of the things that I learned, because I spent so much time. I took short sabbatical last year to really focus on myself, do a lot of therapy, a lot of self, development work. And so that has been, sort of the pathway, if you will, leading up to the launch of Courage Class this past fall. So we just wrapped season one a couple weeks ago. We're about to launch season two. I'm in the middle of podcast recordings. Super excited. Incredible season. I feel like that we have lined up for folks. So I definitely hope that you'll tune in. But if you're just joining today, I am talking about fear and how fear, in a very unhealthy way, has played a significant role in keeping me small. And maybe it's not fear per se, because what I've learned recently is that fear is actually courage in action, right? It's a normal part of the human experience. And as long as we can be comfortable saying that out loud, it almost sort of enables us, or I'll speak for myself, it enables me to still take action, to take those first brave steps. And that's super important, at least in my story, because historically, growing up, we did not talk about emotions. It was an Asian family. Okay. And we were not about to acknowledge that we were going through any sort of shit. To the world, we projected perfection and like we've got everything. But we were really having, I think, in my family, well, I'll say for myself, I was really having a very individual, alone experience. And so this idea of acknowledging any emotion beyond like happy in a very toxic positivity sort of way, is a completely foreign concept to me up until maybe last year or even a couple years ago. So, um, I think that it's really important to, or at least for me, to know that fear is part of the process, and acknowledging that is it was life changing for me. So, fear, when it came to emotions, I used to gaslight myself, like, why are you feeling that way? And, feeling any emotion beyond happiness, and the occasional maybe sadness, but even that, like, you're going to stuff it down and not let anybody see that, was really part of my own upbringing. And so that's what I really carried into my adult years. I really carried into it this idea that, we're just going to push through. We're not going to acknowledge how difficult anything is. We're just going to go out and do it. We're just going to, but because I couldn't tolerate anything beyond just sort of the burnout routine that was like deeply embedded in, it was really difficult for me to take any sort of risk in my life, because I was so conditioned to, like, I don't want to feel feelings. I don't want to feel any sort of uncertainty. And because I'm a perfectionist, in a very, very negative way, I'm going to keep myself small. I'm going to just stay the safe course. And so I shared a minute ago that I'm the creator and host of a podcast platform, and we're really looking to bridge out, to talk about AAPI stories and narratives, next year. Um, that is not in my risk profile, like, at all. And if anything, I am someone who, um, is terrified of any sort of risk. But I would never admit, old Lindsay would never admit that out loud. I would just sort of, um, I would stuff that down, and I wouldn't take the risk, because the risk comes with it the feeling of so many different emotions. And that is something that I was not built to tolerate. I did not understand at all, didn't have the skills at all of how to tolerate such discomfort. So, anyways, I'm going to take a pause there. Thanks so much for joining. I really appreciate you coming into the live, taking time out of your busy schedules. Hi, Jaden. Hi, Seth. Hi, Sleeping Ghost. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to come in um, and engage. I really appreciate. Um, I'm just sort of learning social media and how to leverage it to build community, and I'm so impressed at, the reach that it has. And there's a greater reach to being plugged into a platform, than any other opportunity. And so it's always wonderful when I get comments on videos, and folks will like or join alive. Like, it's so cool to me. So, I'm an old woman just sort of learning this this new context. um but thanks again for taking time out of your busy schedule. I just really appreciate it. Today we're talking about fear, and how fear is actually courage in action, and how fear, in an unhealthy way, has been a part of my story historically, for my entire life. What I've learned in my study is that fear is actually a very normal human experience. And it's a normal human experience. There's not a person or thing on the planet that doesn't experience some level of fear, especially when you're ready to take a risk, right? You're ready to pivot. You want something different for your life. You want to change a habit. You want a different career. That is an incredibly scary pathway to pursue. But there's so much comfort, at least when I think about it, there's so much comfort in knowing that fear is part of the process. And so, what you're going to do is just let fear ride shotgun with you in that process, as you change your career, as you pursue a new habit, as you shed old friends. Fear is going to be a part of the experience, and the ability to actually acknowledge that. Now, that is a skill in and of itself, because historically, and I'll just speak from an Asian American, female experience, like, I didn't grow up in a family that acknowledged emotions. In fact, I grew up in a family that, like, was just the opposite. I grew up in a family that really, shamed any sort of emotion. like, how dare you feel or not be satisfied or happy with your life. It was a lot of, I think, toxic positivity to some degree. I still grew up in a loving household, and we were just never taught to feel. And whenever we would have a big emotion, we would sort of be shamed. We would be left alone to deal with those emotions. And that was really, really painful. I learned in therapy that's a very painful way to live. And so, if there's any sign as we kind of come to the end of this live, there's any sign that you needed today to take that next step, that next career pivot, that next, you want a new habit next year, you want some sort of change in your life. One, just know it's going to be hard. Okay, that is like without a doubt. That is the common experience across across. And so across all of our experiences. And also know that fear is part of the process. That's normal. You're not abnormal. It is part of the process. And it's something that if you can not resist it, not push back against it, it will be so much easier for you to reallocate the amount of time and attention and energy that you put into like resisting. You can reallocate that into actually taking the next step. And there's power in that. There's so much power in knowing that you can do that you have a choice in reallocating your time and your energy into something that you believe will fulfill, will add meaning, will add value to your life. You're in control of that. You're also in control of fear. You tell fear, okay, be part of the process. I don't like it. And if you have to be here, fine. But I'm still going to take that next step. And if you need any sort of cheering, I really want you to follow or message me, and I will be sending good energy out into the universe to support you. Courage Class is here to support you. Courage Class is here to cheer you on. If you are part of the AAPI community, I know intimately what it means to have expectations and narratives just handed to you. I mean, we all do, but I know exactly what you experienced, or I have some knowledge. I don't know exactly. That's not fair. But I am almost certain that can draw from some commonalities in our experiences of being children or grandkids or of great grandkids, like our families, they were immigrants at some point somewhere in our historical trajectory. We were new to this land, and I know that that comes with a level of like hustle, and you just have to survive. And so I really think that if you need some encouragement, I hope that I'll be here again next Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, or please follow Courage Class or at Dr. Lindsay Kwok Q on all social media platforms. TikTok, I want to thank you so much for letting me do this. TikTok and YouTube, I really enjoyed. Thank you so much for coming in. And I wish you the most amazing and blessed weekend. Keep learning. Know that it's okay. It's hard. Learning is really difficult. And just know that you have a community always here who's cheering you on to support you. So, okay. Be well, everyone. Thanks so much.